Ever since the beginning of the game, reverse joints have been the red-headed stepchildren of the PvP scene, lacking stability, heavy in weight, and weak defenses. The cost of having the funny chicken legs far outweighed the unique movement benefits. As such, its presence in tournaments and ranked leaderboards is virtually non-existent outside of stubborn players and mean builds. However, with recent buffs to them, the legs have started to be taken seriously here and there, and while they certainly don't dominate leaderboards nor tournaments as much as bipeds, their presence in the current 1.07 metagame is not as insignificant as it used to be. Older players still dismiss the leg based on experience and preference, but over time, minds have slowly begun to change. Overall, it's safe to say that stats don't hold back the leg type as much as it used to. Now it's simply a matter of learning the nuances of the leg type and translating that into builds and tactics that fit into what the leg is good for. That said, this is not a build video. We'll discuss stats and information relevant to each leg of the classification, but if you're looking for one or more funny chicken builds to add to your garage, you'll be pretty disappointed. What this video aims to do instead is teach you the very basics of good RJ movement and to help you separate yourself from the kick spamming stereotypes and into the realm of good gameplay. Before we get into the movement itself, you need to talk about stats so you understand how and why RJs move the way they do. In terms of defensive stats, RJs tend to be among the worst in their respective weight categories. Not always the worst, but often bad enough, particularly where stability is concerned, that players overlook this leg type entirely for more stable and sturdy bipeds. Having described all of what makes reverse joints a bad pick, what could possibly differentiate them enough to attract people to them? The first one is the most default one in just about every conversation. It's the kick. Of all the leg types, the kick of a reverse joint is the fastest, farthest reaching, hardest hitting of any other option. This is often described as having a fifth weapon or a pocket melee option, only really countered by smart, experienced play or good use of a shield. The second reason, the absolutely ludicrous jump distance of the category. Even the bounciest of bipeds come nowhere near the distance and speed of a reverse joint hop. Even the heaviest reverse joint can casually launch themselves over buildings or put themselves over 80 meters in the air with almost no EN spent to do it. This results in some very interesting interactions that can be undesirable for those not built or prepared for it. The movement itself is very fast, but feels very floaty, and if you're prone to spamming quick boost, you often find yourself quick boosting mid-air at the mercy of your booster's base stats without the addition of the legs, stunting your dodge and feeling inconsistent. We'll get into the weeds about this later. For now, let's discuss the parts themselves and how they compare to one another. Castlewar is the lightest of the three parts. It boasts the highest jump height and distance of every option, with a weight comparable to the midweight VP422 legs and defense slightly better than the flimsy Noctrider legs. This high jump distance can translate to some of the fastest non-assault produced movement in the game. Paired with a strong quick boost thruster like NGI or Lula, Castlewar legs can easily catch up to any of the speediest kites or be an extremely fast kite themselves. The trade-off is being exceptionally fragile. Mind Beta is the midweight option for RJs. Their weight is more comparable to the chunky but still firmly midweight Basho legs with defensive stats closer to VP422. They have the lowest jump height of the three legs, which will matter very little generally, but if you want a more vertical kite-oriented playstyle, you may want to consider the other two options. If you wish to play more grounded, the lower jump height is still more than high enough to clear obstacles and will let you hit the ground slightly faster. Of the three legs, Mind Beta has the best weight-to-weight limit ratio, letting you pack on heavier cords and stronger weapon loads without becoming too terribly heavy on your own. For this reason, Mind Beta is the most common reverse joint you'll see both in tournaments and on the leaderboards. It's a solid balance of speed and weight that's fairly aesthetic in its appearance. And fresh from Carla's Bakery, Spring Chicken's recent buffs have put it in a fairly competitive place. The heaviest of the RJ legs, Spring Chicken is as heavy as the TQ legs, with defenses roughly as dense as the over-nerfed Barrel Quad legs. Given how the other two perform defensively, this is quite a surprise as it boasts the third highest kinetic defense of all the legs, being behind only Born Meza and the aforementioned TQ legs. Spring Chicken ACs have a unique place as either heavy vertical kite, very heavy aggro builds, usually with something like twin LCDs or earshots to confirm off of a kick, or as an odd, heavy grounded kite, utilizing its bulk and good ground movement to be frustratingly difficult to deal with. Spring Chicken has some interesting possibilities that have led some to argue that this may be the strongest of the three options. And the next most important thing to legs for an AC's movement is in its boosters. In this, reverse joints have a remarkable number of options because of its ludicrous jumps. This makes normally specialized options like Kikaku or P10 pretty decent options depending on your needs. So with that in mind, you are typically looking for things that matter to you in terms of other forms of movement. Wurzel and P10 work best if you're going to be spending the majority of the fight in assault boost, either Soko boosting or jousting. Fuyukinnko and Flugel are the choices for melee-oriented builds. NGI and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you want to take advantage of the ground movement while still having good evasive movement in the air. Experiment and play around and then test in the arena and see what feels good, and don't automatically discount a booster just because it's considered universally bad for bipeds. Some boosters could be very efficient for the sorts of movement you want to do. Others can have weaknesses easily overcome by the capabilities of the leg type itself, while the strengths also help carry for the weaknesses of the leg as well. Good movement in an RJ means spending as little time as possible neutral boosting. You won't be as fast in this state, and without the defensive stats of bipeds, you can't afford to stand there and trade hits. This makes quick boost hopping the foundation of good ground movement. Quick boosts cover ground very quickly while simultaneously disrupting FCS lock. Movement like this is simply referred to as hopping for obvious reasons. Hopping side to side as you approach or retreat is a very quick movement that is hard to lock onto, and projectile speeds being what they are, a number of projectiles will flat out be unable to get a clean hit on you. You do need to be aware of terrain and how it affects your movement. Sometimes an odd incline, piece of floor, or a little wall or building you didn't see can catch you more reliably than an opponent's weapons and be even more devastating. RJ quick boosts are so long and floaty that you can act in the middle of them. So, firing weapons, starting an assault boost, quick boosting a different direction to throw off SCS tracking are all possible before the end of the leap, but you must understand these actions are treated as if you did them mid-air with all the consequences that entails. If the action changes your acceleration in a meaningful way, this can work to throw off projectiles. It can also work to your disadvantage against attacks with an aggressive tracking like missiles, kicks, and melee. Suddenly stopping to launch a stance weapon or start an assault boost can be a quick ticket to pain if done recklessly. In CQC, hopping around your opponent can keep your movement evasive while continuously applying pressure and forcing your opponent to react to it. You can also quick boost past your opponent to disrupt their camera and disorient the player. Depending on what they're doing, their AC may stop completely, opening them up to surprise kicks or creating a window for you to retreat. The jumps are so high, you don't even necessarily have to go to the side, as an AC with a short enough height can flat out be left over at the right distance. This is stylish, but it does put you right in the face of someone who doesn't even need an FCS to hurt you at that point. Jumping is just as foundational as quick boosting to RJ movement. It is one of the fast accelerating actions you can take in the game, launching you around 60 meters into the air faster than many weapons could lift and shoot. Combine this with the game's anemic projectile speed and difficulty tracking verticality, you can jump back, float down, and deadfall a great number of attacks without spending any EN whatsoever. It provides avenues of escape and evasion otherwise unavailable to other leg types. Even if you run out of EN entirely, the jump can serve as a means to escape a deadly situation while your redline recovers. Just bear in mind that while this can save you in a pinch, your EN recovery while mid-air is greatly stunted, so be aware that it may not always be the best decision. At longer distances, jumping and falling is just a decent habit to get into. You're constantly moving at fast and varying speeds. It's hard to get caught on terrain, and dead falling, that is, cutting your boosters completely and letting gravity take you, is a valid means to evade. Other builds have to spend a little bit of EN at least to reach heights and speeds you reach just by tapping jump. The only true downside to this is that while it's very efficient, it again leaves you at the mercy of your booster stats while in the air. Plus, if you become too predictable, it becomes very easy for players using earshots, facades, or other manually aimed weapons to land a shot at your landing. So that's the very basics of RJ movement. Next we'll talk about some interactions and get to some more part and circumstantial based movement. Jumping and then assault boosting sounds like a really simplistic form of so-called advanced movement, and it is. But it's a fundamental part of RJ play when it comes to using your assault boosts. Assault boosting and jumping both disrupt FCS. The issue is the pause for your AC to switch from their current mode to assault boosting is a brief moment of time your opponent can take to land a hit on you. The more advanced and focused a player is, the more they'll be able to exploit that moment. Jumping covers that moment as their FCS has to track you. Any projectiles already on the way are thrown off by the speed and acceleration of the jump and the sudden stop of your ascent. By the time an opponent can lock on again, you'll likely already be in the middle of your AB. This has value virtually at any range, but is particularly useful when you want to circle boost in your opponent's face. Typically when you start an assault boost on or near your opponent, it'll end very quickly as you accidentally or deliberately knocked out of the assault boost by a body bump. By jumping, you put an immense amount of vertical space outside of your opponent's immediate visual range and avoid any potential terrain or body bumping altogether. Some boosters allow you to take this concept a step further by giving you huge aggressive turns on your opponent, letting you land a kick at odd angles your opponent is unlikely to be prepared to defend against. But Fuyukinnko, and arguably one of the best RJ players in the world, is a big proponent of this movement, and there's a whole string where they go into depth about it. If you speak Japanese or have a good tolerance for poopy closed caption translations, I'll leave a link to the specific stream in the description. Triangle leaping is a far less useful piece of movement, but it's worthwhile to have in your repertoire as it's a useful tool with plenty of applications if you find yourself in the right circumstances. It's different from triangle boosting in that it utilizes your legs' jump stats to give you immense distance as you QB out of your AB. However, because it uses your legs, it means you need to be assault boosting very close to the ground. I've only been able to do it really consistently while either in soft lock or through a couple different ways in hard lock. In soft lock it's fairly easy, while being in a neutral position, just shuffle and QB in the desired direction while close to the ground. Rather than normal triangle boost, your feet will firmly plant and launch you to the direction you hold. If you're good at transitioning between soft and hard lock, this is probably the best way to consistently do this. In hard lock it becomes much more difficult. Any distance closer than 150 meters turns your leap into a normal triangle boost regardless of which leg or booster you use, and even then, only if your opponent is grounded. This launches you a good deal of distance, but it doesn't appear to maintain much of any momentum from the assault boost like a normal triangle boost does, so keep that in mind if you do it. Terrain can affect this as well. If you're going up an incline in any way towards your opponent, effectively all your triangle boosts turn into triangle leaps. This type of movement is only ever consistent when you and your opponent are grounded, but if you play mostly in soft lock, this does give you something to add to your repertoire to end an assault boost if getting close for a triangle boost doesn't necessarily appeal. Lesser triangle leaps can be performed in one of two ways. One is simply holding forward and QBing out of the assault boost. This gives no real practical benefit by itself, but it does allow you to keep moving at speed rather than cutting your booster, kicking, or deploying a shield. Movement is life, and continuing that movement is the trick to keep on living. Backwards is another option that gives you a good deal more distance and can be a great way to bait out counter kicks or dodge them entirely and prepare an appropriate reprisal. Left and right are also possible, but require a directional button or stick to already be held down in the desired direction before you hit your QB. This is either done by holding it during the AB or to pause long enough after the shuffle left or right without releasing your stick and then hitting QB. Again, not much in terms for practical purposes as a triangle boost is both easier to form and faster, but if you want to load up a dodge for an incoming kick, facade, or E-shot blast without relying on stick movement to guide your AB, and you have a booster that's not suited for dodging, then adding your legs into the mix isn't the worst option. It's effectively leaving your AB into a grounded QB, which is one of RJ's greatest strengths. Keep in mind, all of this requires you to be assault boosting along the ground to work. Even a meter off the ground will remove your legs from the equation entirely. Understanding how to do this is important even if you never use it, as it's very easy to do purely on accident, so knowing this will let you have a better understanding of how and why it happened, and how you can avoid it when you need precise movement and distance with your opponent. This same sort of movement can also be done while melee canceling. Against a grounded opponent, staying near the ground will also perform the same way, planting your feet and QBing towards your target. This lets you cover ground lightning quick and perform some rather nutty fake-outs on top of your camera disruption. Again, like triangle leaping, it won't see much use if your opponent takes it in the air, as is often the strategy when facing melee, but can turn into an ugly surprise where it can be used. While RJ ground movement is very strong when used correctly and thoughtfully, it's a fact that much of the game is spent in the air. With reverse joint jumps being as strong as they are, you'll find yourself fighting mid-air more often than not. Your quick boosts are at the mercy of your base booster stats. Your EN regen will be slower, and your neutral boost will tend to be a bit slower due to the heavier weight for the loadout you have. Worth noting is that your fall speed is no different than bipeds. The floaty feeling comes from the sheer height of RJ jumps, not any inherent capability. This height is what enables some very efficient vertical movement. Jumping and allow yourself to fall is good at basic movement at long distances. With a strong QB booster like Alula, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or NGI, more active aerial evasion becomes available to you. Dead falling is another simple form of aerial evasion where you cut your boosters off and allow gravity to take hold of the AC and cause you to plummet. Just taking your hands off the direction buttons is all that's required to just go straight down. Any other movement during this fall will cut your boosters on and slow your fall again. This sort of sudden acceleration and deceleration allows you to exploit the predictive SCS and slow projectiles easily throw off shots with minimal effort. As a side note, dead falling is the fastest way to get back to ground, so if your setup performs better there, you should know how to do it to reposition. Assault boosting is the most important form of movement to understand in the game, period. It alone requires a separate video, and thankfully one is being worked on by Striker Utasa and some talented players, which I'll link in the description if it's released by the time this comes out. We already covered jump assault boosting, but you can also start it right after a QB with similar results. This costs EN, but is still safer than starting an assault boost from neutral, as you'll have the benefit of a disrupted FCS to start from. When chasing vertical kites, you should also never start from a diagonal position. Your EN will be spent by the time you reach them, and you'll be eating shots the entire time. Instead, always start your assault boost towards them from as vertically as possible. This means your EN situation upon reaching them will often be superior to theirs, in addition to simply being faster to reach them. RJs are particularly potent, as their quick boosts cover a lot of ground very quickly, and jumping before your assault boost covers a ton of vertical space for free. So much space that assault boosting could sometimes be unnecessary altogether on low enough flying opponents. Cover play on RJs is another point of concern, particularly when facing bipeds. A biped could turn in on the corners with their QB much better than an RJ, giving them distance and time to reset, set up ambushes, or whatever. In this case, the RJ again needs to play to their strengths. Rather than chasing on the ground, try jumping over the cover instead, if possible, and to try and cut them off entirely while having the building itself as your cover. You can force them into a repeated series of guesses where they'll either need to engage you outright or be forced out of cover to go elsewhere. The same is true of the opposite scenario. Bouncing over cover rather than around it can build distance and buy time. High cover, such as tall buildings you can leap over, are particularly useful for burning an opponent's EN if they wish to retain proximity or a line of sight. Behind cover, with an opponent being forced to approach, is where the reverse joint is at its most dangerous, and that is thanks to another potent tool in the AC's arsenal, its kick. Kicks are an intrinsic part of a reverse joint's capabilities, and one of the primary reasons it gets selected over other things. These kicks have a higher damage multiplier and longer range than any other leg type. Additionally, rather than a short lunge followed by the kick, RJs stop mid-air to wind up and then unleash the kick. While other kick hitboxes are in fact boxes, RJ kicks are instead cones, making them more akin to like a short-range shotgun. The wind-up has the unfortunate effect of making the kick easily predicted, but the sheer speed and distance make it nearly impossible to react to mid-animation. Moreover, the size and length of the hitbox requires specific kinds of movement to successfully dodge. Dodging up or to the side is inadvisable unless you can cover a lot of distance to the point where the kick's very aggressive tracking can't keep up. Dodging towards the RJ to its side is more reliable, as you can usually put yourself in the dead zone of the kick while it sails by. RJs really don't have any issues dodging opposing RJ kicks on reaction as long as they're grounded. The distance they cover is often more than enough. Even a jump becomes a valid option. There are two types of kick you should absolutely never perform. The first is the obvious straightforward kick, where you simply AB at your opponent and kick with no other action before or leading up to it. It's easy to predict, almost as easy to avoid, and is really just a strategy of people taking advantage of bad internet. The other kick to avoid entirely is kicking into shields effectively ever. Shields prevent the mini-stun, mitigate the damage and the stagger, and leave you vulnerable to retaliation. The only time it can even be argued to be valid is if your opponent is already at very high staggered with frequent shield use. But even this is highly circumstantial, and if you are inexperienced or have no idea about your opponent's habits, you should avoid it altogether. Instead, you should take kicks when opportunity and movement allow. Has your opponent burned a lot of EN? Can you start an AB safely? Is the opponent up against the wall or other terrain feature? Are they coming toward you or away? Time, patience, and experience will teach you the best time to act if you pay attention. Another thing to note is that a kick itself does not disrupt FCS in any capacity, so performing a shuffle, jump, or any other such movement prior is advisable, both as a means to avoid damage and to make your kicks more unpredictable. Additionally, this movement can be used to condition opponents to expect kicks when they are coming, or to place yourself to where kicks come from off camera and therefore virtually unreactable. In general, you should be endeavoring to kick less, not more. Seek opportunities to land a clean kick rather than using it at the end of an assault boost like an exclamation point. RJs recover from quick kicks at framing too faster than bipeds, but is still more than enough time for an opponent to punish the whiff and land damage you didn't even take. However, RJ kicks have some of the most aggressive FCS-free tracking in the game. So if you look for dead angles, opportunities to punish a missed stance, a window to counter kick an assault boosting opponent, these can be used as ways to land a kick. An interesting component about kicks in AC6 that's especially prominent on RJs is that kicks don't really have any collision of anything but another AC. Meaning if a kick comes in contact with a wall or other obstacle, it will slide in the direction it was tracking, with its active hitbox catching opponents who mistakenly believe that the kick is missed. This is rare in practice, but noteworthy enough to keep in mind. Where this particular mechanic comes into play most often is when using and working around cover play. RJ kicks tend to wrap and slide around corners so you can fly around the corner and slam a kick into an unprepared opponent. On offense, this keeps opponents from trying to catch you coming after them or hanging around too close to the edges to try and peek shots at you. On defense is where it's the most dangerous, as opponents tend to AB around said quarters and will very often eat a kick to the face without trouble. Horizontal kicks aren't even the only surfaces this can be used on. Rooftops and thin columns are equally abusable. I've even landed a kick from underneath a bridge to an opponent moving on top of it, and to my eternal shame, I did not record it. That is just the level of absurdity you can accomplish. The cover hides your kick and covers it during its startup animation. If an opponent catches themselves and backs away during a kick, the tracking will likely pull you far enough away from the corner so as not to expose yourself. Even if you miss and you overshoot the kick, your opponent is likely doing a similar action, causing both of you to sail by one another at speed, giving you just enough time to recover before your opponent can turn and punish. In other words, this type of kick is very likely the safest you could throw and should be a regular part of the repertoire. Even if your opponent understands the danger, they're still playing into a mind game you can work around to exploit to gain distance, deal more chip, reset stagger, or burn time. You're throwing from behind cover, and even a miss isn't always a punishment. Any type of obstacle you can get around can be used for this, up to and including the ramps on Lock Station. A final point about kicks before we move on and end the video is how they interact on staggered enemies. If an enemy is staggered and takes a kick straight on, they'll be knocked back to 120 some odd meters away from you. This is desirable if you're kiting or need to disengage to reset. If not, use a stagger extension instead, so your kicks only knock them back about 10 meters. This allows you to continue your punish or renew your pressure in close range. But again, less is more. A well-timed kick or a surprise kick is far more devastating than a kick thrown out of habit. A kick that can convert into a severe punish is much more impactful than one that merely builds towards a punish. Reverse joints are a leg type every bit as different from the others as bipeds are from quads. Understanding the movement is to give you access to some of the fastest movement in the game. Ultimately, bipeds are the beginner's choice. Snappy movement, excellent stats, and a variety of builds and strategies that can be easily built in any weight class. Bipeds simply win. The RJs give you a unique set of tools to work with that give you advantages no other leg type has. Building around the disadvantages and exploiting the leg's strengths is merely the start. Mastering its oddities and patiently using its tools take time and effort to learn and work with. But in the end, the reward is a fast and active playstyle with a unique leg type.